Welcome back. Today we'll continue this conversation looking at the introduction for this course. I'll be addressing some concepts that we'll be using throughout the semester that are related to the content that we'll cover. So the first one you're probably very familiar with. If you've taken sociology, it's a word that they address there too, but we need to talk about it in this class because it definitely pertains to what we will be covering. So the first one is stereotype. I'm sure you all can think of a stereotype, right? It could be race, class, gender, sexuality, or even other types of stereotypes. And we all tend to use them. Doesn't mean that that's a good thing, but it's just the nature of the way that we tend to sometimes look at the world, which again, very problematic. But that's how people kind of perceive reality sometimes. And the problem with stereotypes is that they tend to be very rigid, right? When you think of a group of people, you tend to make a generalization as to what they're about, right? So sometimes we use these stereotypes to define a particular person. However, all this applied knowledge is already there. So these statements leave very little room for difference, right? Think of the first time you met, a certain type of person, and you go, "Oh, you don't fit the stereotype that I normally associate, your group with," right? And you're kind of puzzled by it, or maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable because you've been so institutionalized to think of people in a particular way. So this is part of the reasons why stereotypes are so problematic, right? They leave no room for a complex identity. I'm sure if I were to ask you to define who you are, you would probably have a hard time explaining that because you see yourself in a very complex way. However, if I were to ask you, identify this person, what do you think they're about? A lot of times the stereotypes come into play. You go, well, I think they're this and that, even though you never met the person, right? But a lot of it's just based on this, these ideas that we have of different groups of people. Now, sometimes we use them for, to make fun of people, right? Something like, all white people like mayonnaise. And it's like, well, it seems harmless, right? That, well, it's kind of funny, right? White people and their mayonnaise or something like that. However, these statements could be very problematic. And I'm sure you probably know other type of stereotypes, right? So a lot of times a stereotype can limit human interaction, right? That sometimes because we assume certain things, like white people like mayonnaise, it's like, well, I don't want to associate with people who eat mayonnaise because mayonnaise is disgusting, right? So it can limit that human interaction, but it can also lead to intolerance and subordination. So we'll define those terms too. But basically, there's this animosity associated now with who these people are. So this can quickly snowball into something much worse. And lastly, it can actually lead to violence, right? A stereotype of a person can actually cause physical harm to somebody else. And if you've been paying attention to the news, you have probably seen this happening already, right? With all the Karen videos out there that we have. So again, stereotypes might seem harmless at first, but they do have a major negative impact on people's lives, particularly those people that are being critiqued, for being a particular way or whatever it may be. So I'm going to think about this question. Maybe I'll ask you to see if you can think of any stereotypes that we have for women, since we're focusing on women in this class. And again, apply some of this idea. Is it just, a very harmless comment, or could it have a major negative impact, right? Think about the way we categorize women, the way women dress, right? Or it could be something much more, harmless, I guess, than something like that. Talking about women's weight or those type of issues. So that's the first concept that we'll cover, right? Stereotype. The second one is patriarchy. Now, patriarchy is something that particularly as a Western society, is something that we use and has kind of defined who we are as a community. Unfortunately, it privileges one group over another. So I think in the last segment I talked about, again, me being a man, having this kind of male privilege, right? Patriarchy essentially grants me this privilege. And when we talk about privilege, we don't think like you have a gold card or something like that, right? Is that just I experience certain things that other people might not because I'm a man, that I'll have certain privileges, or maybe better said is that I won't experience certain bad things because I'm a man. For example, I don't have to worry about, at least I don't worry too much when I walk out at night. When I used to teach evening courses at EMCC, sometimes students would say, oh, because I teach like at till about 9:30 or something like that. Do you mind walking me to my car? And I'm like, why would I need to walk you to your car? You can walk yourself to your car. But again, as a man, I don't have to worry about walking to my car and being assaulted, right? So again, these are some of the privileges that I have as a man that other groups might not. So patriarchy is defined basically having a hierarchical social relation that subordinates women. It's part of many cultures, since we're focusing on Western culture, whether it be American or European history. It is part of who we are that kind of goes back generations, but it's something that we kind of privilege men, right, in our society. Everything from being a male heir, giving all land to men, going through male lineage, those type of ideas, right, where we kind of privilege men over women. And understand that it does have kind of social and economical practices, right? Because we do assume men to be superior, it does privilege them in different ways. A lot of times it's economical. There's a belief that families need to be heterosexual, right, with a man and woman and kids. And a lot of times throughout history, men were paid more in wages because they were seen as independent, whereas women were paid a lot less because they're seen as dependent. Well, eventually she'll get married, right? Or, she's just doing this temporarily, so we don't need to pay them a lot of money. So these ideas are not just terms that are used maybe in the home, but actually have a real impact in people's lives. So what happens when a person doesn't marry or doesn't want to get married, particularly if it's a woman, right? Just because she's a woman, it means that she's not going to get paid the same salary as a man. There was a study done not too long ago where men get paid, for every dollar a man makes, women get paid, I think it was 76 cents. It's been a while. This is two people with a BA, same degrees, same job. As the years go by, she will end up making, I think it was like 5 cents less. So she went from making $76, or 76 to the dollar that a male makes, now to 71 cents, or 70 cents to what a male makes in a 5-year span. And this study kind of focused on white women. Women of color end up making even less. I think Latina women are at the bottom of this idea. And as I mentioned earlier, we tend to privilege primogeniture, men, and a lot of times it's established through primogeniture, where the first male heir gets everything, and women are just subject to the families that they're born into. And then lastly, this, the concept of patriarchy limits gender roles, right? It limits women, and sometimes it sanctions domestic violence or sexual control. So the article you have for this week talks about how many men in places like California kind of felt like they had the right to attack Native American women, right? These women of color, only for the reason that they were men and that they needed to do this as part of that kind of conquest ideology that they bring from the old country. So again, like the stereotype example, we'll ask to see if you have any examples for patriarchy. I want to address these two words because sometimes we confuse them. Sometimes interpret them in at least incorrectly. So we have the word oppression and subordination. So in this class, we will be talking about oppression. And again, the first article talks about oppression. A lot of times we use this word very lightly because we assume, well, I'm being oppressed. My professor makes me read a lot. He's oppressing me. That's not really the same thing, right? If I was beating you over the head with a book, maybe that's a form of oppression. But at least for this class, when we talk about oppression, we're talking about something that is established through a physical violence, right? So when you're being oppressed, then you're being oppressed because there's some kind of physical attack upon you. And again, the first article that we talked about, or that we have for this week, addresses that, right? These women, Native American women, who kind of just minding their own business, are physically attacked by these Spanish men, right? So the next example, the next word, this is probably more what people mean when they're saying they're being oppressed, at least not all people, but some people, is subordination, right? Subordination is associated with this concept called hegemony. And a lot of times it's established through the construct of a common sense or through kind of cultural norms or practices. So something like, well, that's just the way it is, right? Is a great example of subordination, where not only the person that's being, not only the oppressor, but those who's being oppressed, I guess, is also kind of just submitting that, well, I can't do anything about it, I'm not going to change it, so why fight it? So subordination is something that's learned. Throughout history, we have many examples where sometimes, just give you a generic example where, you know, maybe your older brother has a curfew that is at maybe 10 p.m. However, your curfew, if you're a woman, is 6 p.m., right? Earlier during the day. And they're saying, well, we're doing this for your own safety, right? That's an example of subordination, because here your brother has the privilege to go out till 10, yet you're required to, you know, get home earlier. And to some extent, maybe you accept it, like, well, I guess that's just the way it is, so why am I gonna, I'm not gonna challenge it. So throughout the course, we will look at many examples where these concepts of subordination are created, and, you know, like the word institutionalized, right? We become part of this system, and we kind of accept it. So this is why we talk about women's history, because there's a system in place, and then women challenge it, right? Maybe you say, well, you know, today I'm gonna push it. You know, I'm not gonna stay out till 6 p.m., but maybe a little bit later. And I'm gonna give you another word that addresses that idea. So the word agency is that idea of challenging subordination and oppression. The word agency, again, another sociological term, is the ability for you to make choices, right? So don't think of agency like an agency where you go get a job or anything like that. The word agency refers to more of you having personal agency. You have the ability to have some form of free will. Now that doesn't mean that they're God-given rights or anything like that, or even some kind of superhero concept, but that there are certain limits put upon you, and you challenge those limits. So going back to that example about curfew, right, where, you know, again, your brother has a later one than you do, you might use your agency one day and say, well, I'm going to stay out till 10, just like him, right? So there you utilize your agency. You know, you're out and about, you know, doing your own thing, and you get home at 10. Well, you just challenge the rules that were put upon you. So that's, you know, again, that could be a good thing, right? And that's what we're kind of arguing here. So it's something that's not a trait, but an achievement, right? You went against the rules that were set upon you, and you decided that, you know, look, it's not right that he gets so many more hours than I do, so I'm going to go out and do it. So you kind of broke a barrier. So this can help you. It's, you know, maybe your parents go, well, I guess, you know, she can't take care of herself, so, you know, we'll extend her curfew till 10. Or it can hurt you, where your parents kind of go, whoa, you went against the rules, you know your curfew's at 6, and now we're going to come down on you, and they don't suspend you, but they keep you home. They keep you from going out, right? So, and it's a little bit more complicated than that. But again, I just want to show you an example of agency, because we'll see many examples of that. Another kind of good example from the article is that women, these Native American women did not just let themselves be physically attacked, right? Many of them were being attacked, but they used their agency to do something about it. They actually fought back, and the reading talks about how some of them, utilized their agency and set up raids to attack the Spanish troops. So there we see a form of agency. Now, understand again, it can hurt you, because some of these women were killed when they were fighting back. So unfortunately, they're the ones who were being attacked, yet they're the ones who had to pay the price to try to stop such actions from happening to future generations. So again, agency is something that we'll see as we move forward. All right. So I'll stop it right there. The next example, kind of major concept that we'll cover, is called postmodernism. You have to pay close attention, because this gets a little bit complicated. It took me quite a few years to try to figure this one out. And I had to read a lot of books to figure it out. And I'm trying to synthesize it in a way that you will understand it. I'll also play a video. The video is a little bit problematic, but I'll show it to you anyways, because it's a good video. All right, so I'll stop it there.